Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the PAC Chat. I'm Felicia Malelli, Board Chair for New Jersey Public Health Innovation PAC. Today, I'm joined with our Board Secretary, Katie. Hello, Katie.
Hi, Felicia.
In October of this year, the State Capitol Joint Management Commission passed a resolution that would require a negative PCR test or COVID vaccine card to enter the New Jersey Statehouse. That mandate was set to go into effect yesterday, December 1st. And let me remind you that the New Jersey Statehouse is a public tax-paying house and that the State Capitol Joint Management Commission are unelected officials. This mandate would apply to legislators, staff aides, and all members of the public, including children. The one concern we had of this mandate was if it starts here, where will it end? Well, we have come on today to report to you that the New Jersey Republican legislators collectively sued the state to block the proof of vaccine requirement, and in the interim, the application that they submitted for a stay on this order was granted temporarily with a potential hearing date later this month. Let me add that the members of the New Jersey State Assembly GOP caucus took it a step further, and that's why we're here today. In a moment, we will bring on Assemblyman Jerry Scharfenberger to tell us exactly how that went down. But first, I'd like to point out that our goal in forming NJ5 PAC is to get behind, with our support and contributions, legislators who protect our constitutional rights and our fundamental rights. And yesterday at the New Jersey State House, that is exactly what happened. Let me bring on Assemblyman Jerry Scharfenberger. Good morning, Assemblyman.
Hi, Felicia. Hi, Katie. How's everybody?
Good morning.
Thank you. How are you?
I'm good. A little battle worn, but doing well this morning.
So bring us up to speed, Assemblyman. How did the day begin yesterday? What was this is picture for us?
Yeah, this is something we've been preparing for. So we didn't just walk in there, sort of in the dark. We had a little bit of a plan on how we were going to react. And interestingly, we didn't know how it was going to unfold. When we first walked in to the building, they took our temperatures, and many of us wear masks when we're in the hallway until we get to our caucus room. And nobody asked for any proof of vaccination at that point. And that was sort of one of the unknowns right there. When was it going to start? I got there fairly early in the morning, and a lot of the legislators did. Apparently, the ones who got there a little later, closer to 11:30, I think I got there around 10 o'clock. Those who got there around 11:30 or so were asked to either produce a vaccine card or take a rapid test on the spot there. And several of the legislators, politely nodded and just walked into the building. And, at that point, they could not prevent you from walking in, but they did ask some of the later arrivals. And, the point of this is, too, and I'm the prime sponsor of a bill that would prohibit vaccine passports in New Jersey, A5607. So clearly, that's what this is. It's a vaccine passport where you must show proof of vaccine to get into the building. Now, many of the legislators have gotten the vaccine. A number have natural immunity where they've gotten the virus and recovered from it and now have the antibodies. So that wasn't even the case. It was just the principle of having to show papers, so to speak, to move about freely and do your duly elected duties. And this is something that we felt we had to draw a line in the sand. And as much for us as the general public, we didn't feel the public should be prohibited from coming into a building that they themselves pay for. I mean, this is a taxpayer-funded building that you're prohibiting people from entering unless they provide personal medical information. And I know, the speaker has said, well, this is to protect people. Well, you know what? Getting the vaccine does not necessarily prevent you from contracting the virus. And the CDC reported in, I think it was Massachusetts, a recent outbreak, 74% were among vaccinated persons. So why are you singling out people who may or may not have gotten the vaccine or have the natural antibodies, which, according to all of the studies, is the best protection against it, even better than the vaccine itself? So these are all these variables. But what it boils down to is personal information that you're being asked to divulge. If we allowed this to happen yesterday, it would open up the floodgates down the road to have government intrude on in your personal business, to be able to, walk about freely and assemble freely, and all the constitutional rights that are guaranteed with no conditions attached to it. The Constitution's very clear. There are no conditions to those rights that you enjoy as Americans. So here, this was a bigger issue than just us coming in, because some of the most militant about not cooperating with this order were folks who were vaccinated. So that was not the point. The point was where the government had the right, this tremendous overreach into people's personal information and personal business like this, to allow them the simple option to be able to walk about freely and enter a building. So that's pretty much the basis of what our objection was.
Beautiful. I mean, and personally, obviously, I'm fully supportive of that. I agree with you. I think as soon as this resolution passed, most of our antennas went up and said, wait a minute, what is this? What is this about? And it felt not only restrictive to our elected officials who we elect to go to the State House so that we have a voice when issues come up and you guys need to vote. We make sure that there's, all sides are present, that you can give your statements, like everything, right? That the public can come in and give testimony, all of it. And this felt very like eerie, almost, like there was something else at play here. And I just wanted to say, we're so proud and just so thankful for the Assembly Republicans who stood up and stood together to do what you did yesterday. And I want to hear more about how that went, once you got through those doors, like how it all unfolded, so we can share it with the community, because I know that it wasn't easy. Most of our community, we're advocates. We've stood in Trenton before. That's kind of like your place of business. That's where you're used to going and doing your work, right? For us, when we would go, it would be intimidating. Like, oh my God, the first time, the second time. But the point is, and this is your point, is that it's our right to be there. And anything that blocks us from going in there, it makes you scratch your head and wonder, what is this really about?
Right.
So thank you. Thank you for having the courage to stick with it. And for all of you, in the Assembly, the Republicans, to stay together and work towards this united, because that's so important. And like you said, it was whether they were vaccinated or not vaccinated, whether they had their cards in their pockets or didn't, you all stood together on principle. And that's the point, right?
Right, exactly. And that's a very good point, Katie. And I also want to point out, too, that from March 2020 until yesterday, we had protocols in place where when you walked in the door, you had your temperature taken. Everybody's fine with that. It's almost like walking through a metal detector at that point, where it doesn't impede your movement. It doesn't pry into personal information that you must produce. It's just sort of a practice. And we were fine with that. Many members wore masks. We had plexiglass around our desks. Those protocols had worked. We don't know what changed in that year and a half when there were protocols in place that worked. There was not one incident of any sort of an outbreak or transmission case that we could trace back to a lack of more stringent protocols. So For a year and a half, everything was working fine, to the complaint of no one. All of a sudden now, they throw down the gauntlet where you now have to start to do this. Now you have to wonder if it has to do more or less with lame duck sessions that are notorious for bad legislation that some folks want to ram through coming up. And is this a way to stifle any opposition? You know, that's the belief of many, many folks out there. And I've heard from citizens, I've heard from other legislators that they believe that's what's driving this more than any good faith concern with the health and well-being of people who are entering the State House. So that's one thing that we could not get past. Why are we deviating from a system that has worked flawlessly for the past year and a half to now come down with this very restrictive, very oppressive sort of mandate that came down, you know, somewhat out of the blue? And we never really got a clear answer on that. And there was a lot of discussion beforehand with the majority and the speaker, you know, why are you doing this? And, you know, just you get some kind of half-hearted, well, numbers are ticking up and everything. Numbers had ticked up and dropped all along. Why now?
That's a great question. And, you know, I think you bring up a good point. There had been no incidences to lead up to this.
Right.
And I guess I think definitely a year and a half at least that you've been taking those precautions and everything's been okay. So I want to ask a question that's from from our viewers. I think it will help expand, you know, for people who aren't as close to this issue. But how could a committee without power do this? How did? Yeah.
I'm sorry, Felicia, but I get so wound up thinking that I don't even know who the people are on this commission. And if you look up on the state website what their charge is, it's more like the artifacts inside the building and more the physical building, almost like building and grounds. Here, they make the colossal leap to impeding the movement of duly elected legislators. That's a lot different than managing the physical building. You know, so for them to decide this, and you know, our argument too is we don't want, you know, the governor's appointees making these decisions, because all of a sudden then you have the executive branch impeding on the legislative branch, which is unconstitutional. You cannot have one branch of government interfering with the operation of another branch of government. That's why they're separate. The judiciary has to be separate. The legislative branch and the executive branch all have to be separate. They work together in their collective roles, but they can't. What's the sense of having three separate branches if you're going to have one branch dictating what the other ones must do?
Absolutely.
So that's, you know, there's a lot more to this. There's a lot of constitutional questions. And I believe, and I'm not an attorney, so I'm going by, you know, what the attorneys have advised me, that the fact that the stay was granted and we're going to be getting a hearing on, it's December 13th is going to be the hearing, and the appellate judge had granted the stay. They see enough there that there may be some constitutional issues that are, you know, provable in court, I guess. So that's what we're dealing with right now. And, you know, thank God that we got the stay that showed that we had some validity to our objections. And
can you talk about that for a second? So exactly what was done with the stay and lawsuit and who was involved in that?
Well, the Republican caucus had initiated the request for the stay, and we worked very hard on it. You know, we all got to look at what the argument was, and we have some really good attorneys who were elected officials, elected legislators. So we had a good team putting this together. And the judge decided, I believe, I forget exactly the moment it was decided, but I heard about it, I think, after the meeting had adjourned. So, you know, we're hoping for the best, and we have 2 weeks, a tad less than 2 weeks now to prepare. And we're going to do everything we can to make the case, not only for the legislators. We're a tiny cog in this wheel. It's for the public at large. The public, once we start to prohibit the public from weighing in on legislation and the legislative process and things that they should have a voice in, we're really in danger. as a society and as a republic. And, it's something that we're going to go down fighting every step of the way to protect that on behalf of the residents and the taxpayers and the voters.
So to confirm, the State House is open to the public for the next 2 weeks. If anybody happens to want to stop by and see their legislator, have a nice conversation, bring them some coffee or donuts, you're welcome, without showing any proof of vaccination, at least for the next 2 weeks. And I have a good friend, I will give her the credit for this because it stuck with me, that when there's a giant, you need to cut off its foot, cut off its arms. You can't just go in there with a small bow and arrow and shoot it down. So this is a win, and it needs to be recognized as that. So thank you.
Right. And, it's very encouraging that, you can push back and have an impact, that all is not lost when you have some dictate coming down from above, that you can fight it and, win. And then yesterday we won a battle. This is a longer conflict, but we certainly, prevailed in a battle.
And can we just recap just from the beginning too, just for our audience, and for people who are getting up to speed. So this all began with a resolution, and stop me, Jerry, if I get anything incorrect, but just to
Sure.
kind of bullet point for everybody. It all began with a resolution that came out of a special committee of 8 people, correct? It was 4 people in the executive branch, so in Murphy's administration.
Right.
And then 4 within the legislature.
Right.
And
2 Republicans and 2 Democrats.
Right. And so making up a total of 8, and they passed this resolution in this special meeting.
Right.
And this resolution is documented, and anybody has access to it and can read it. Basically stating that you cannot go into the State House unless you can show proof of vaccination or proof of a negative test. And then I think it was amended recently, right before yesterday, to say that they would be allowing tests to be done on site as well.
Right.
That was a new thing. And so yesterday, December 2nd, Thursday, was the first full session in Trenton. And what that means is that during lame duck, right? And what that means is that is that correct, or am I wrong? Was it the first full session, or was there one prior to this?
Under this.
Not under this. This is just the first full session after this resolution would have been implemented.
Exactly.
And the implementation of this resolution stated December 1st. So December 2nd was the first full session where basically all the elected officials are called to come to the State House because their bills will be heard and voted upon. So it's usually a busy day when it's a full session, right? And the way I understand it is that the Assembly Republicans were united, and they planned on together going through security and whatnot, and not showing the proof of vaccination, whether they had it or not, and not taking the tests, whether they could or couldn't, right? They just moved through. And you did that on principle, and to take a stance and to say this is not okay. And in addition to that, you guys had already began filing a lawsuit and pushing things legally, right?
Right.
So I think that's sort of the summary up to there. Once you get past security, where did you all go? Speaking from, since you can, it seems like you can speak on behalf of the Assembly Republicans, since you all seemed like you were together. What happens when you get past the doors? Then what happened? Anything else transpire throughout the day?
Well, oh God, that was only the beginning. Getting into the building was almost the easy part. What we do, we all convened in the caucus room. Each Republicans and the Democrats each have their own caucus room where they meet to discuss bills prior to the voting session. So we were in there, and we had gotten word that they locked the doors to the chambers. So we couldn't enter the chambers until, a certain point. So, things were changing as moment to moment. We really didn't know. At first, the state police had said that they weren't going to enforce or, inquire your status. And then we got another letter saying that they would cooperate, so it was sort of, a lot of unknowns there. So we had decided what we were going to do was we were going to go up through one entrance, to the main entrance into the chambers. And if we were denied entry, we were not going to force our way in. The whole thing with us, we didn't want to put the police in a bad position. We weren't going to try and, burst through the, the line, whatever it was. We were going to be respectful, but we were going to ask for entry. And if, they absolutely denied it. So when we got there, we just simply walked around the police, and they were not going to stop us. They said, and let me say something about the police. They were, I can't think of a word strong enough to describe how fantastic they were. They were just tremendous. They were professional, they were courteous, and they were completely understanding of the situation. And they understood where we were coming from. And we certainly understood that they had to, they have their orders and their instructions, and they have to abide by that. So it was very mutual in, respecting each other's position on that. So they were so good. They never lost their cool. They never got testy with any of us. And, we were very appreciative, and they knew that we appreciated the position that they were in. And we were not going to, force them into doing something that, would be any sort of, friction between us and the police. So they were so good. And it's really, you don't get to see police from that, standpoint too often, executing their job like that. Usually you meet with them on issues and things like that. So it was interesting to interact with them, but they could not have been more cooperative and professional. So that made it easy. So we were able to enter the chambers and get to our desk. And that's sort of where the real tension started, because we were the only ones in the chambers at that point. And, there was a lot of back and forth, a lot of communication between the speaker and representatives from the Republicans, saying that you guys have to leave and all that. And at one point, the speaker actually asked for a second security sweep, which would have meant we would have had to vacate the chambers. And what would have happened after that? They would have kind of regrouped and made sure we didn't get in. So once we were in the chambers, that's where the problems, sort of arose for, stopping us. And we sat there, and there were, threats coming down. You're going to be removed. You have to vacate. And the police, again, relayed the message that they were getting. We're asking you to leave, but, pretty much we can't physically force you to. And, we waited it out. But, we kind of relayed our concerns back. It wasn't just we were being obstinate and sitting there. So there was negotiations back and forth between, how we were going to proceed from there. And eventually the speaker relented and rescinded the request for the second security sweep. There was already one, so this was clearly to get us out of the chambers. And we were able to work it out where we sat at our desk. We voted, normally. Now, I should qualify all this with saying there was an option, if we so wanted, to vote remotely by phone. Now, that makes you not only a second class, like a third or fourth class legislator, because you don't have the value of having your colleague next to you. You don't have the value of seeing other legislators, how they vote. You don't have the value of being able to stand up and speak in front of your colleagues.
Can I interrupt you for 1 second?
Sure.
Actually, because I have a comment in the thread, someone who's very informed on the Constitution of New Jersey, and says that you can only vote, according to 4.46, you can only vote on the floor, not remotely. And and can you explain how this was even thought of to override the Constitution? So it's a constitutional New Jersey state law that you need to be on the floor to vote. Is that correct?
Yes, and you know what? You have a guy here who's not an attorney, so
Yeah.
I can dig up artifacts from the founding fathers, but I can't interpret from a legal standpoint. But from what's been explained, and whoever wrote that is correct. But there was an executive order, months ago, or some sort of order that allowed this, because for several meetings we were all voting over the phone, and then you would have a roll call vote, and you would do one at a time. Assemblyman X, yes. Assemblyman Y, yes. Assemblywoman B, yes. And it would go on like that. So if you had 80 or 90 bills, it would take forever. And I think the other side wanted to avoid that, because if worse came to worse, if we absolutely had to vacate, we were going to vote remotely, all of us. But we were also going to exercise our right to speak when possible, even though it would have been, from a distance over the phone. I think whoever asked that question, and again, I am not an attorney, so I can't say 100% sure the constitutionality or legality of it, but there was an order that did allow it because of the state of emergency. So
yeah, that was referenced also, and said that there was a change to it as a new rule to the remote hearings and voting.
Yeah, but that very good point, and keep in mind too, with voting remotely, it's really not. It's a constitutional problem, because it's not equal protection under the law. You're treating one class of legislators differently from another one if you force them into that position. And I'm not talking about somebody who may be, calling in because they're in the hospital or some extenuating.
Right. This goes back to segregation.
Yes.
And discrimination.
It is.
Of your basic human rights.
It harkens back to the actual test. Why are you forcing people who may not have gotten the vaccine or may have the antibodies to get tested, but not people who were vaccinated, who could still get the virus and still transmit it? Why are you not forcing them to get tested also? So again, that's not equal protection under the law to, this archaeologist's legal knowledge.
Excellent. So then what happens? So you're in the state chambers, and they're trying to remove you, right?
Right. And eventually we got the word that it was being rescinded, so we weren't going to be removed, and we were allowed to vote. So then, the majority party came into the chambers, and we started the meeting, and we started the session, I should say, and we voted on a number of bills, and the session was ended. And it was, you look back and say, what was all that to do about? We came here, we ended up voting. It was fine. Everybody went home now. And this was much ado about nothing. They brought in all these police officers, dozens and dozens of them. I mean, every doorway had, 5 or 6 officers there. And all of the people who came in, all of the expense of bringing that in, for what? Yeah, you have to ask yourself, for what? For this big show? But, I'm so heartened that we really held our ground to make a point that, listen, we have to put a stop to this. We're giving up these freedoms. Once you give these freedoms up, you can't put this toothpaste back in the tube. It's lost forever. And these are the kind of things that people have died for over the years. And this is a much bigger picture than 28 little legislators going in to press a button, yes or no. This is a bigger picture, and somebody has to take a stand. And I'm very proud of the caucus, the way we stood up, and we did it in such a way that was reasoned, it was logical, it was well articulated, and it really made the point without showboating or grandstanding or any of that, silly stuff getting dragged out and, for the cameras. It was really, we had a good plan. We had a plan B and a plan C if, what we were doing initially wasn't going to work. And it was always with great legal advice, and it was always with a cool head prevailing. And that's something that I think, the voters who elected us can be very proud that, we stood up for the constitutional rights, the basic rights. We did our job, and we did it in such a way that you can look back upon, which you can be proud. And I think, driving home that hour and 15-minute drive home from Trenton, sometimes you get into a situation and you think, oh, gee, if only I said this or did that. I had none of that. I think we really handled it as flawlessly as you can. And the outcome was pretty much, the way we would have written it. And that's a very good thing. Now we have another voting session scheduled for December 16th. We're going to start from square one, and we'll see where this goes. Hopefully the judge will rule in our favor and say this is unconstitutional, you can't do this, and it'll be moot, and we can get back to focusing on the issues and the bills that come before us. If not, we'll deal with that too. But I'm very proud.
I was going to ask Jerry, if the judge doesn't, rule that way, what's the next step legally? Because you guys are also, am I correct in saying? I actually want to clarify this. I don't know if we've had a chance to talk about it, but I know that the Senate Republicans are fundraising for a lawsuit. Is that the same lawsuit? Is that the collective lawsuit that the entire Republican Party is putting together across the Senate and Assembly, or is it two separate things?
At this point, I believe it's two separate things. We may at one point. So a lot of times when you have multiple similar lawsuits, the parties join together and make it a collective lawsuit. So again, this is a little bit out of my league as far as determining which is best and how it will all play out. But right now we're preparing for the December 13th hearing. I'm very confident. ARO, the Assembly Republican Office, has some really, really strong attorneys, and we're getting really good advice. And like I said, some of the members are at the top of their game, and it's really good that we have such muscle behind our legal opinions and legal strategy.
Absolutely. And I think it's such an indicator, because my question to you would have been, what would you have done differently, like looking back in hindsight? And I didn't even have to ask it. And the fact that you have already thought about it and there's nothing you would have changed, that to me screams success. Just from hearing your story. And it sounded like, unfortunately, Speaker Coughlin was trying to find another way to sort of get you guys out by doing that second security sweep. And you guys sniffed that out right away. And it sounds like most of you were able to stay and stick to your guns. And I'm sure that was really uncomfortable. It's hard to defy rules.
Yes.
It's hard to say no when somebody's asking you to do something and you're normally a respectful person who follows course. I imagine this was difficult for you.
It was, and you kind of you have the stomach to be in politics in the first place, so you're a little bit positioned for it. But I'll tell you, everybody there has been in office for quite a while at all levels. Me starting with mayor, then freeholder. So I really came up through the ranks, and this was probably the most, for lack of a better term, gut-wrenching situation I've been in. And you never know until you're faced with a situation how you'll react. And sometimes the best thing is just to keep your cool and never lose it and start to flail wildly, where you kind of make a mistake that way. And if you really stay quiet and think it through, it'll come to you what the best way to handle it. It doesn't hurt to have some really good advice from people who are a lot more knowledgeable on the law and the process as far as that. So, all those things considered, I think we really handled it well. And let me say, Speaker Coughlin is a gentleman. I know him. I've worked with him. He was a co-sponsor on one of my bills. And, I think there's probably more to the story than we even know, in his position. So, and I'm hoping we can work this out, going forward from now on, so it doesn't get to this point again, even beyond that. So I'm the eternal optimist. I really hope that we'll be able to work it out. And if not, maybe the court will help us, giving us some cover with a decision that, we find favorable.
Yeah, I think that's a great strategy. So working it legally, but then also just working it and how you can meet your peers, your colleagues across the aisle. Because to me, this doesn't feel like it's a partisan issue. It shouldn't be. Why is this? Why is it about party? And I'm so curious too, like, how you were received by your peers and your colleagues. That, like, were any of you shamed? Were there any looks of disgust? Were there any, or were there secret applauding, or like, I can't, like, kind of like, I can't cheer for you guys, but you guys are doing the right thing. I just can't do what you're doing because I'm on the other team. That's what it feels like. There's like a little bit of all of that could be happening, right?
I think there was, and I spoke to a few of my colleagues from the other side of the aisle, and they were very cordial, and they didn't snub us and show any sort of junior high type anger, and that's to their credit that they were we all interacted with them and wished them well in the holiday season here, and that sort of thing once they came into the chambers. So, and I think they understood our position that, we have a position much the way they do. And, we're respectful when they take a stand. We don't have to agree to it, certainly. And we can make our case of why we don't agree. But certainly we respect their ability to take a stand different than ours, and certainly willing to listen to their argument, regardless of what it is. And this is one of those. And I know there are some on the other side who, I think deep down inside, if not fully agreed, certainly understood where we were coming from with this. So that's a little bit of a good takeaway from this whole thing too.
It is, and that that is an inch that we need to make into a mile, because that's where I think that's what this is all about here in New Jersey. It needs to be. It's easier for me to say I'm not a Republican elected official, but I think that we will get more collectively when we can, meet and find common ground, like regardless of what party, right? And I do think that I know there's definitely people on the other side of the aisle who had to be thinking, I relate to this. I don't fully agree with this resolution, but they're, for whatever reason, they can't speak up about it. We have to keep
absolutely
making this, so that it's not taboo to talk about this and to stand up for your rights and have a voice, and all of it. So
that's very true. And you know what, Katie, I just want to point out one other thing too, that we just had an election, and Republicans picked up 7 seats in the legislature. And I think a lot of that had to do with this sort of heavy-handed government overreach. So the voters are making their voices heard, and I think, whoever you are as an elected official have to be mindful of that the voters, feel a certain way on certain issues. And this is not a matter of being pro-vaccine or anti-vaccine or pro-mask or anti-mask. This is purely personal decisions. And, I feel, just speaking personally too, I rely on my doctor, and he will give me advice on, what he thinks is best for me. Should I cut out eating cheesecake at dessert because of my cholesterol? And he'll leave it up to me. I don't want to be mandated whether to eat that cheesecake or not. And the same thing with every other medical decision. Now, if you determine, and, my whole family's vaccinated, and that was their choice. They did it because it was a choice, not because they had to. And God bless them. That's the way it should be. But the minute the government starts coming in, it's a very slippery slope. What's next? I think there are 72 vaccines out there. Do you want the government mandating, 30 of those vaccines for your own good because they know better? That's the issue here too. It's not pro or anti. It's pro personal decision. And I think the minute we deviate from that, we're all in big trouble.
I agree. So this is one domino in the link, the chain of dominoes, and allowing this domino to fall. And as you said, in the beginning of this discussion, it wasn't just about the legislators. Like, while you guys, were there sort of, living the demonstration out yesterday, right? Pushing the boundaries, the red tape a bit. This resolution affects every resident in New Jersey and our rights to be able to go to the statehouse, to walk in there, to give public testimony physically to just walk, the hallways like we do. And we love to shake the hands of the legislators as they're passing by and give them a quick, 1 minute, 2 minute spiel about why issues are important, et cetera, et cetera. This could easily silence and, start compartmentalizing protesters, right?
Yeah.
What if there's a big issue? One of the biggest things Senator Sweeney complained about was that we caused a ruckus in his house, right? And that we were like noisy and chanting and throughout the halls. And we were. I remember sitting in the Senate Health Committee 2 years ago, and we were packed like sardines. There was overflow rooms. There was people sitting on floors. It was hot, like, all of it. And I think that all of that was important in terms of displaying to our legislators, this is how important this issue is. Like, you're not going to minimize this. We're here.
Sure.
So showing up is really important on issues from the public perspective. So this resolution, it's very scary that it would start to handcuff the public in a lot of ways and make it more difficult, maybe pushing us even further from the State House. So now you can protest, but you can only protest here. It really, if we couldn't protest and be the way that we were 2 years ago, I'm not sure that we would have had as big of an effect. If they would have put us on some lawn far away, the legislators wouldn't have had to hear us chanting for 8-10 hours in the freezing cold rain. They heard us chanting. Everybody was tired. They wanted to leave too. And it was almost like, I can't believe these people are out there and they're still doing what they're doing. That's the point of a demonstration. That's the point of making a point. And this resolution is very scary because it would stop us from being able to do those things easily.
Absolutely. And, that's a great point. And another good example, too, is even the committee meetings, too. You mentioned the health committee. But Monday I have higher ed. And I think later in the week, I probably have environment and labor committee meetings. Now, those are very valuable to me as a legislator because you get people coming up when bills are first being considered. And there's still time to maybe, make some amendments to them before they go to the full floor. If you cut those folks out from coming up and speaking on those bills, we legislators lose a very important resource as far as information and expertise that we certainly don't have. We can't be all things to all people. So you rely on people who are very knowledgeable in certain areas. So if you lose a lot too, as far as having sound legislation by cutting out people who would speak on certain issues like that. So there's a domino effect. Again, it starts at the committee meetings and then it goes all the way up to the voting sessions. So it's tremendously valuable for us to do our jobs properly. And it's also the right thing to do to have that input. And that's the way our system of government is set up, for and by the people. And those people, they have to be allowed access to have their voices heard. And if you stifle that at one point along that line, it cuts off that flow all along the whole process. So you're absolutely right. And that chanting, to some it may be annoying. To me, that's music to my ears, because that's democracy. That's our republic in action.
Yep, that's exactly what I was going to say. In summary, this is all based on the democratic process, our systems of checks and balances, and being able to have our voices heard and stand up for what we believe in. And it's, again, our tax-paying house, the State House. So it's multiple layered. It's not just, I appreciate everything you did. We know in part some of it was for yourselves, but mostly it's for the state and the people. So again, thank you for that. We have some questions. A couple questions keep coming up. But what about the kids? What about the kids? They're still wearing masks and all these other mandates. I think it's important just to separate that those are based on executive order,
right?
And the actions that you took yesterday and with this lawsuit is based on this resolution.
Exactly.
At the State House.
I just will mention, I'm co-sponsor of a bill. Assemblyman Catalano and McGuckin are the prime sponsors on a bill that would prohibit mandates for masks on school buses and in schools. The majority party has not allowed it to come to committee yet. So, we are pushing back by sponsoring legislation, and you're well familiar with my bills I have a bill that would make the flu vaccine voluntary, the COVID vaccine voluntary, A5607, which would prohibit vaccine passports in New Jersey. So I'm the prime sponsor on all that legislation. So it's there.
So, and what's happening with those bills? Because these are great bills, and our community would love to see them come through fruition. But what's this? Yeah, what's the update?
And I hate to sound like a broken record, but they're being held up from going to committee and being released for a full vote. And we've done everything. I've tried to get Democrat co-sponsors, so far unsuccessfully. But the bills are there. So if folks live in districts, especially districts where you have Democrat representatives, please reach out to them and respectfully ask them to sign on to the bill. And if your legislator is on that committee, or a thing of beauty would be to be the chair of that committee, ask them to bring it to the committee to review it. That's the way it'll get out of the station and start to move along the process. Once it gets to the floor, then I can take it from there and lobby, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. I'm not worried about the Republican caucus, understandably, that they would be behind this. But, as far as getting the majority party on, that's where we really have to do some work.
Great. That's great points. I think it's important for constituents to know that they have a role.
Yeah.
And they can speak up. There's a couple comments that people living in districts where their legislators aren't their voice because they're not representing their values. And some of, we've been told stories where specific legislators, they won't even answer the calls to their constituents on these issues, which is tremendously wrong. But, keep pushing. Specific, any way that you can get through the door with a conversation, maybe someplace where you can meet them in conversation, and then bring up the issues that matter to you. Maybe don't come in directly with this. There's a bunch of ways, but I think it's important to make sure that you have a relationship with your council people, senators, assemblymen and women, and let them know what matters to their constituents.
Absolutely. And you know what? I love hearing from people. I try and answer personally every email. In fact, I got a funny response when I responded to an email saying, "Is this automatically generated?" And I write back, "No, I'm sitting at my desk answering it." And, so I personally like hearing from people because there are so many issues that I may not be aware of, especially if there's specialized issues that affect a certain segment that I may not be, that high profile in the mainstream. So I love hearing from residents. I love it. And I think it's really important. And even, people who may be angry at a position I've taken, I've won people over just by reaching out. So I think a lot of legislators are more like me. There may be some who are a little bit more distant and detached, and, you'll have to deal with it. But again, you vote on their performance as much as their position. And that's something to keep in mind because, the voters and the residents, they're the boss. And,
I think previously we, people were living their lives. They're just doing their thing, going back and forth from work, taking care of their families, doing what's important to them. And this pandemic and these mandates have woken them up. So I think just mentioning this is great so people know that there isn't a wall between you and your legislator. They are human, just like you, and they represent you or intended to. So to just make that call and knock on that door because it's your right.
It is. And you can roll into my office anytime, and if I'm there, if I'm not in Trenton, I welcome, seeing people. I have a great staff. Brian and Paul from my office are aces as far as relations with the constituents. So it's really a well-oiled machine. And, like I said, most offices I believe are like that, and take advantage of it. You're the boss, you pay their salaries, and, you deserve that sort of response.
Great. Any final remarks?
No, just first of all, I want to say thank you for giving me the opportunity. I thought it was important for people to hear a little bit of the inside baseball on actually what transpired yesterday. I certainly wanted to get out how tremendous the state police were. It was just, I'm still, my biggest takeaway is how remarkably cool they were under a very volatile situation. And it easily could have gotten out of hand, but they were so good. And, you see the training, you see the training in diffusing situations, left and right there all day, throughout the whole day. I mean, this wasn't just a 5-minute encounter. This was hours long. And they were tremendous. And I'm going to, tell their superiors how great they were. It was really
that was our experience with them as well. I could say mine at least, but always when we were in Trenton, very respected, and just there to do their duty and keep things in line.
Yeah. So that was good. And you know what? It's sort of all's well that ends well, for the moment. That, it's nice to see. And I think a lot of the texts I've gotten, hundreds of texts and comments, like, hey, you guys were great. This was tremendous that you stood together the way you did. And I think people are so conditioned to being let down by elected officials left and right. I know, me too. Sometimes I think, my God, what are they thinking? How could they cave on that? And to have people stand their ground and have the outcome come out in a good way, I think is very encouraging and reassuring to people out there who, have spent a year and a half under this hellish sort of lockdown, which ebbs and flows a little bit, but is still clearly with us and, seems to be ratcheting up again. So, I think it was a good thing all around for the morale of the voters who wanted to see this sort of thing. And it was certainly good for us that we toughed it out and were rewarded with a good outcome. So I think this is a good thing for us going forward.
Absolutely. Thank you so much to you and all your peers who had the courage to stand up and, make this point yesterday, allowing yourself to go through the discomforts of yesterday.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's easier to just comply, especially when you have gotten the vaccine or you're willing to take the test or whatever it is. Sometimes it's just easier to comply, but a lot of the times we have to stand up and we have to go through these discomforts to make a point, to make a statement, so that things just don't get, easily kind of passed through so easily. And you guys, what you did yesterday, I think was really important. I know it was difficult, in many aspects. And I just want to, again, say, how proud, I am personally to know that there are legislators like you and the others who were willing to unite on this and stand up and not back down. So thank you so much for doing that. And, we look forward to hearing more of how this transpires and how we can continue to support you.
Thank you. And I just want to point out too, it was united from top to bottom, the leadership in the caucus down to the worker bees like me. So it was really a sight to behold, and we're very happy. And this is just the beginning of this sort of protracted situation we're in.
Great.
All right.
Thank you so much. Again, as Katie said, we really appreciate your commitment to this and for everybody staying together. Our community who is watching, we've been watching intently this morning with questions and comments of gratitude. So I wanted to pass that along. And to our community who's watching, please stay connected to us. We will keep you updated on this particular issue and issues relating to health freedom, parental rights, bioindividuality, and informed consent, and protecting and strengthening those issues here in New Jersey. So please stay connected to us on our social media, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, Telegram, and there's call to actions, updates with news, and we will keep you abreast and keep fighting with you and for you. So everyone have a great morning. Thank you for staying tuned in.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.